Hey, Steve Saretsky here. Welcome back to the show. I want to touch on something that we've been talking about on the show for going on a year plus, which is immigration growth, population growth, and the strains that's been putting on our housing markets here in Canada. Not only the housing strains that you're seeing in the resale market, the rental market, but you're seeing these issues manifest in the broader economy, which is you're seeing it putting strains on the medical system. You're seeing it putting strains on public services, infrastructure. You're seeing social frictions, right? The mood is turning anti-immigrant here in this country. You can see that in the polls. People are upset because you can't absorb this economy. It does not have the ability to absorb 1 million people plus every single year for the last couple of years now. And we're growing at the fastest rate since back in the 1950s. We don't build housing like you used to back in the 1950s and 60s. Post-war, we just throw up a 900 square foot bungalow in 2 weeks. So we're having real strains on the housing market. And so, there's been talk in government and the polls don't look too good. Let's start pulling back some of the immigration here. That's what they told us anyways. That's what they told us. That's the conversation. I sat down in Mark Miller's office and had a one-on-one conversation with the immigration minister, and we were told, we're gonna rein it in. We're trying to figure it all out. Well, we got the numbers from Stats Canada just this week. We're looking at the working age population. So as of Stats Canada, so it's a working age population. That's people aged 15 and older. That cohort in Canada has grown by 410,000 people from January through to the end of April. So during the first 4 months of this year, the working age population in Canada grew by 410,000 people. That's a record high. It's higher than last year's record, which was 278,000 people. So a 47% increase in the first, year over year in the first 4 months here. And so, we look at the deficit of the working age population relative to housing starts. And I mean, this chart really tells you all that you need to know. This is setting ourselves up for an ongoing crisis in this nation's housing market. We know what's happening with housing starts. We've talked about it at length on the show. All you have to do is look at pre-sales lead housing starts, and pre-sales in places like the GTA are running at decade plus lows. Here in Vancouver, we're going to see about 5,000 pre-sales for the whole year this year. Compare that to a record in 2021 of about 20,000. So pre-sales are crashing, and that's going to follow suit into the housing starts. And so again, if you continue this pace, it will ensure that you have a housing crisis 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years from now. And so again, if you look at what's happening in the population growth by city, right? If you look at the metropolitan regions in Canada, places like Calgary running at 6% population growth last year. Vancouver running at 4% population growth. We don't have the ability in this country to build housing fast enough, quick enough, cheap enough to absorb, 6% annual population growth in some of these metropolitan cities. And so, the immigration minister says, well, hold on a minute. I thought we were slowing down population growth. That's what we were told. You remember about a month or two ago, the immigration minister says, listen, we're going to start putting caps on non-permanent residents, aka foreign students and temporary work visas. That's what we were told. So the numbers are dictating that is yet to take hold. I mean, it's probably coming down the pipe, but it hasn't been reflected in the data yet. But while this is all ongoing, we had some interesting comments from Immigration Minister Mark Miller. And so let's clip to those comments right here.
Under the new legislation, children born abroad to a Canadian citizen who is also born outside Canada will be a Canadian citizenship from birth if their parent can demonstrate they have a substantial connection to Canada. As long as a Canadian parent who was born outside of Canada has accumulated 3 years of time spent in Canada before the birth of the child, they'll be able to pass down their citizenship to their child. Finally, we wanted to take this opportunity to continue to minimize differential outcomes as much as possible for children born abroad and adopted by Canadians compared to children born to Canadians.
So now we're getting a new bill that's going to allow Canadians to pass citizenship rights down to their children that are born abroad. So basically what it's saying is, listen, if you have parents that were born here in Canada and they've spent 3 years or more in this country, you can pass down that citizenship to your kids. Now, again, I don't want to get into the politics of it. Basically, the gist of it is there was a decision made by the Supreme Court that basically dictated the Citizenship Act currently includes a first-generation limit to citizenships by descent, which means that children born abroad to Canadian citizens beyond the first generation generally do not acquire Canadian citizenship automatically at birth. And so in December of 2023, the Ontario Superior Court of Justice declared that the first generation limit for those born abroad is unconstitutional. So now they're saying, well, don't worry, if you're second generation, you can pass that down. It just keeps getting passed down. So we're going to open it up. We don't know how many new people are going to suddenly gain citizenship here in Canada. So I just find it rather ironic, the timing of it all. Now, again, we can debate the law and what is right, what is wrong. That's not what this is about. What I'm saying is the timing is rather ironic that at the same time we're talking about slowing the rate of population growth. So he says, listen, we're going to curb the growth rate in foreign students and temporary workers. But at the same time, they're opening up the back door by basically rubber stamping citizenship to people's children that are born abroad and whether they're first generation or second generation are now going to become Canadian citizens that can willingly move or relocate here. What is that going to potentially do to offset the gains that you might get in reducing foreign students in this country? And so I just find it rather interesting, ironic. I hate to put the tinfoil hat on and say, well, listen, there's an important election coming up next year. GDP's in the dumps. The only way to have positive economic growth is by inviting 1 million people a year into this country. You've had real GDP on a per capita basis contracting for 6 consecutive quarters. RBC forecasting it's going to be 7 once we get the updated economic data next week. And so it really, really makes you scratch your head. Again, I really can't emphasize enough the strain that this has been putting on housing markets, the strain that's been putting on the social fabric in this country. And we're seeing that in the data, right? I mean, we have an article out this week showing homelessness increased by 20%, despite the Fed throwing $443 million trying to fix it. Homelessness has increased by 20%. It feels like everywhere you go in Canada, there's a new homeless tents popping up, whether it's in Vancouver, now you got them in Kelowna, you got them in Surrey, you got them over in Toronto, they're popping up in Halifax. This was unthinkable 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, and now it's seemingly there's 10 cities popping up all over the place. And again, I really want to emphasize what I am seeing from a boots on the ground perspective, day to day working in the real estate industry, is housing starts are getting smoked. They're going to continue to roll lower because we are in the midst of an economic cycle where interest rates have pushed higher, significantly higher. It's killed the economic viability of these projects, and there's no way to stop that. There's no way to stop that. A Bank of Canada rate cut, in the next 2 weeks, and another one in July isn't going to turn the tides. Okay. This is baked into the cake. There's more developers that are going to go into foreclosure. They're going into the bust. There's a lot of these issues that are in the pipeline. And we're going to go through a painful economic cycle in the housing space, in the housing industry. There's going to be a lot of weak hands that get shaken out. But at the same time, that is going to result in fewer and fewer housing starts and new homes. So again, if we continue to allow 1 million people into this country a year, you're going to have a problem that is going to show up 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, right? Keep in mind, as it stands today, you're not seeing so much of the impact immediately right here, right now, right? I mean, let's be honest. Housing demand is weak. Rates are high. The economy stinks. You're not getting those inflationary pressures per se in the housing market. They've kind of tapered off. The rental market's eased up a little bit. But again, if you continue to open up the back door to uncontrolled population growth, I do have concerns about where this country is going to be 5 to 10 years from now. And it's concerning that you're seeing other countries around the world that are also kind of going through similar processes. And it kind of makes you wonder if it's part of potentially a bigger picture item that is being pushed down throats of some of these G7 countries. But certainly in Canada, we're one of the largest offenders, population growing by north of 3%, double the rate of what you'd see in the US. I mean, it's unbelievable. And so I just want to get everyone's attention focused on this, that this is going to continue to put strains on housing markets. And you can rezone and you can do this and that, but you can't entice the free private market to build when it's not economically viable as it is today. And so you're sowing the seeds for the future crisis. So that's all I have to say. Interesting. I'm watching it. Don't want to get too political and conspiratorial about all this, but I find it interesting that every little tweak that they make in the headlines, there's a tweak kind of behind the scenes. And so we'll have to wait and watch and see the population growth data as it progresses over the next 12 months to see how much smoke and mirrors a lot of this policy is, or is it actually going to come to fruition? Or are we actually going to slow population growth down to levels which are projected, assuming they hit the targets and say what they're actually going to do? You should see population growth around 400,000 and not 1.1, 1.2 million, which would be a big change. So again, 400,000 is still not a small number. That's normal for Canada. So this is not like a reduction. 400,000 is the norm. And so we'll see. We'll see how this all plays out. Food for thought, always trying to think about the big picture and what are the ramifications here. But I thought that was interesting to highlight and point it out this week. The games that are being played politically behind the scenes. So we'll watch and continue to report. As always, hope that helped, and we'll see you next week.